Hello everybody, welcome back, welcome back to the Factory of Culture. Your jobs at the blast furnaces of production. Okay, yeah, we're going to go straight into, we're going to go straight into the debate and the discussion now. But before that, I just wanted to say, before I forget, some plans about this evening. Paul Sullivan from Static contacted me before, and our food from POW will be ready for 7 PM for lunch, which I think is good. That means we can have our discussions, finish up here, then you can have some fresh air, wander back to the hotel, etc. Emma has kindly agreed to appear with the hotel. Yeah, it was like the genie from the bottle of culture, from the Factory of Art. About what 6:30 did we say? A walk up for those of you who don't know your way to Static. 6:30, 6:30, yeah. 6:30 for 7, darling. And so we'll be at Static for 7, and we'll be able to sit down, have some food, have some fun, look at Paul's Kimchi Cow and stuff like that. But in between there, we have an arc of discussion, which I believe we can start now. That's it from me.
So what is clear that the term hasn't been really codified, and that this is really very good news. So there is no agreement, or there are different approaches to the term. So I think it's impossible to make the conclusion that would provide us with clearer meaning of the term that we had at the beginning. At least we have more questions. Yeah.
I think we were discussing at lunch. I think what I found really heartening as well today was Anders' presentation, that kind of shift from being quite concerned about the term itself to then thinking actually this could be a really useful resource for opening up debate, whilst one accepts that there isn't any one singular the definition, that it is a problematic term that needs us to discuss and fight for values with and over and through.
I think. Yeah, I think that mostly we were, regarding the question of what is new, what has been changed in this collaboration, different collaborations is mostly, most of us were referring to the institution, as the institution is changing, has to change, but is it the only thing that is changing? So I think that there was a little bit discussion on art as well. I point to the fact that art is changing also, that there are new modes of art. Anders was saying also something regarding art, but more from different perspective, I think, that I have in mind. So that's also important, because we are art institutions. So how to think art in this regard, let's say, shifts. Ahmed, you were also presenting the artistic position.
I want to make clear that I'm not always speaking from artistic position.
Yeah.
Although I appear in public space.
But that's already new. That's already new.
I am trying to be citizen sometimes. That rights usually I'm not able to. Like in Amsterdam, I live in Amsterdam 8-7 years. I'm not able to vote or anything yet. For instance, where I live, I can't vote or involve with politics directly. Or in Turkey, I don't feel like really part of the political process as well, as I'm originally Kurdish also. So all these complications even makes hard for me to talk from a citizen perspective, so I'm a bit annoyed by that word. So I try to replace that word with something else. Raul is gone now, but he was talking about that. Like we are not only talking about that perspective, but we should consider millions of people that are maybe long-term living in countries, but they are not really part of this decision-making process. So I would say, going back to what you said about partnership with artists, it's also a partnership with anyone who is walking into the institution, audience members or whatever we call them. I can call everyone actually, like intervener could be any person living in the city, lived long enough to have that knowledge, experience, and have a say on heritage. As you described, ownership of a museum should not be only by 4 people or 5 people that are hired by the museum or working for the museum. It has to be taken care of. But how we can democratize that this partnership idea is actually, I think, is kind of from art institutions' perspective, is important. How we can actually genuinely and sincerely make it work, because there are always some people are paid to do that, and some other people are not paid to do that. So in terms of labor, free labor, so we should also talk about like people temporarily entering, like interns and all these other people temporarily entering in and out of institution. Like I question this from my artistic position as well. Like I never work with free interns, but I am unable to afford to pay someone get a paid assistant as well. So I'm just doing everything myself until I can figure out how I can solve that issue. So then I start to question why I'm unable to pay for an assistant as an actively working artist over 10 years. And why I'm kind of by the system forced to get free interns to fix. So this is a personal institutional perspective, but I think it's important this idea of partnership in a sincere way can bring that kind of horizontal constitution to the institutions, like how we can make that process transparent in a way, and that's what this new term you put in. Tell me again, the stigmergy is
one
kind
step up from what you were trying to say.
Yeah, mostly self-organized methods are dead-ended. They always end with same kind of failures. It starts horizontal, and then some people takes over decision making, and then they have conflict between them, and it ends. It usually happens in anarchist organizations, any kind of self-organizations. It ends same failure. So that's maybe a better way to imagine these organizations, like how they can form, and even get into institutions in a parasitic way, but then they become kind of owners of the institution.
I think then what we were discussing, the very critical thing from so far is if somebody is not part of the decision making, I don't think we can really call them constituents at all. And the idea of the art institution is called the cultural institution. It has been. So maybe it gives us some more. I don't know. I don't mean to say that anything is actively working towards a more constituent institution. I don't mean to say that, but it has always given us a bit of more chance to be more involving naturally, because we don't. We can't make a differentiation between artist, cook, and the programming also helps that, and that's why I think we were able to host School of Urgency or Gastronomica, because it's culture in a bigger sense. But yeah, it's. I mean, the word kind of got stuck among the discussions, but by individual I was meaning a person, like anyone who has 2 arms, 1 brain, 2 legs, and the only interesting experience I had, as we mentioned, a couple of the people that we have worked with as individuals, is that there's a threshold, and for the institution that the first one is this, that someone dares to ask for something, dares to demand, and that's, it would be good if Raul was here, because the way he described it, I kind of got stuck whether he means initiated from within the institution, which is, we also think is important to do among the institution at least, to initiate these oppositions and other positions. But this demand, so this architecture student who contacted SALT from salt@saltonline.org asking for space to do, which was very, I think, interesting, to do a workshop without any tutors. So they just wanted space as students to do something for themselves. And it's not anything substantial according to me, but it's an idea and it needs facilitation. So this was the only thing that we said yes to. This is very simple, this is not something we did. But somehow then these people come back with the idea of really having an opportunity of owning the institution. But they made that first step. I mean, that's why I call it an individual, because he sent that letter and because I'm dealing with architecture more, someone sent it to me and I invited them. So this is not a policy, this is not an institution. Usually these are really very small steps, but being open to these, and I think probably at SALT people are, I mean, the staff is encouraged to be welcoming to these ideas. I don't, in general, so that at least gives a chance to be doing these more, and that's how Ahmed approached, not because he was Ahmed, I think he could have approached SALT with this School of Urgency. That's how Gastronomica.
No, I mean, we were like looking for any space that can host such an educational experiment without a deadline. Like, can give a space without telling you have to leave a year later
Not
or 2
pushing
years later.
conditions.
Not pushing conditions, really giving space to whatever is needed for it. So I went first individuals who own properties, like individual collectors or people who are into culture, supporting culture. Different ways and I don't know how to support. I went first to them because I wanted to approach institutions that they don't have an identity yet, so we are not we don't look like another project within an institution. But at the end, SALT was the only institution understood the concept. This is not a project for 3 months or 6 months. It was a school. It wasn't silent university. It was a master program for cultural studies. But that was the only institution, so we ended up there, and they were welcoming that idea without doing any interference in the programming of it. And we also refused to get any financial support from SALT in order to keep things separately of the constitutional structure within and with the institution, not will be confused at all during the process of building up a structure. But these are not always possible. We cannot even start a conversation like that with most institutions.
Yeah, I mean, like when they received that email, this kid, I would say, he was asking to have a room for 48 hours. And so somebody sent a note writing on top of it, I don't think we can facilitate this, and this looks really stupid. And I said, let me meet him and try to understand what he wants to do. And I had to give some conditions. I said, I can take you in at 8 and you have to leave at 10. Because I mean, they close the doors and there's no one, I won't be able to. He said, that's okay, we'll do that. And the second time he wanted to do it in Ankara, in Saltulus. And I said, don't do it there. I can arrange it, but then you become something related to SALT. And we need to, and SALT in Ankara is a very difficult location. Nobody wants to go there. Do it with the school. I know that, I mean, I have to acknowledge it. Do it in Middle East Technical University, bright kids, perfect space. You have to go there. So this is just conversation. It's in fact not something more than that, but I think it's missing if you have too much of a hierarchy naturally, and that's.
But I think it's, you know, it's for us important also to learn from, you know, the fact that SALT is called a cultural institution, not art, but cultural institution, because I think that actually all of us who are somehow linked to institutions are cultural workers. We, the people from institutions, artists, Aida mentioned before, even migrants, you know, people that even are not aware that they are cultural workers. So they all of them, they are somehow using the institution, and I think that the institution should be understood as a tool. And what is important for us is to think how this tool can be used in optimum way, let's say. So it leads to the question of new models of cultural production. And I think that debate that we are having here about the constituencies is exactly this question of the cultural production.
And this, I think, the peer-to-peer education you mentioned is very critical to this, because I was thinking before coming here after discussing constituencies, and then I thought, what do I program? I program lectures. One person speaks and the rest listens to, and of course in the end there are 15 minutes of question and answer, but nobody's speaking in this very close, this is a collaborative like that. So I think, for instance, for cultural institutions, it's a very critical learning tool. If it were possible, that I would like to speak to 4 people only, so that I would learn from them, and maybe if I know something, that would mean something.
But I think it's also interesting and important the notion Ancho mentions, and this is expressive institutions, that we should also relate to that and think about this term, expressive institution, what does it mean in relation to constituencies? And then again, another way of asking ourselves what kind of art is produced in this intersection between movements, between constituencies, between institutions. Is this in expressive institution? It's different kind of aesthetics, as I mentioned also in my short talk. And what is this new kind of aesthetic? What is it expressive, or is it made of something completely different? Affects, as you were also saying. You know, what is being produced, and what kind of forms? Is it still representation or something completely different?
Yesterday's tour was a good thing to do, although it was very cold. But we have to go to public space, right? No matter where. So, do you remember the name of the community member?
Tom.
Tom, was it Tom?
There was Joe and Michael.
Michael and Joe, both of them actually, same. They sounded like, I was first confused, like they are part of the architecture group assembled, or they are, but of course it was clear after immediately we arrived, they were the community members, right?
Yes.
So, but the way they were talking, and we were having like first it looks like some random neighborhood, and then they start to give like historical background, and then all this like political background, and suddenly feels like any other community artist presenting a site-specific work. We are part of some like biennial tour or something, and he was like maybe Trieste Gates at that moment. So it's very much the same way of presenting it. So I realized also today's comment that asylum seekers will sometimes become culture producers themselves, and that's also often how we hope to engage everybody involved in projects and things we do. It was interesting that you lose the division between is that an artist talking, or is that like the way we refer things and communicate and kind of talk about them. I think our precarious way of working can be maybe not so good for us. We have to fight to make it better for ourselves as culture producers. But that can be a good opportunity, a strong, powerful tool for others that are not normally culture producers, that they don't have even any way to express themselves or involve in decision making. Because there is a kind of a gap when you're a culture producer, even though you are precarious, you can actually find ways to access the decision making somehow.
Yeah.
Or at least sit around the same table with those people who make the decisions. So for those who are not culture producers normally, and they know how to act and use the tools as other culture producers, artists or writers and creators, they can suddenly empower themselves and find themselves in sitting around the same table with the decision makers. Yes, it happens. But what happens afterwards is important. So I don't want to be pessimist, because I'm very pessimist about our precarious way of working. But this is actually maybe could be something, if we carefully think about it, could be a powerful thing to.
What do you mean when you say decision maker? What do you have in mind?
Decision making, like what they achieve through that first they started in their living like environment where they wanted to live, and then it went to all the way to municipality. First they had to face the police, and there was all this progress. But because they were cooperating with architects and other people, like who knows how to do the negotiation also from the top, later they didn't even need them anymore. Like at this moment, they don't need them anymore, but they needed them maybe in the beginning to facilitate.
Because it's funny, I thought you were talking about art institution and constituency, not particularly that case.
That case, I think, is a good example because we just lived it yesterday, just to think about all these abstract concepts.
But it's also relevant in terms of who decides, if we talk about cultural production, whose culture,
Yeah.
who decides what that culture is. And I think one of the obstacles is that no matter how we kind of open the doors for our institutions, at some point someone still has a willingness to make a decision or an imperative to make a decision between this or that and so on.
But also, sorry to, I'm just going to butt in because I've got many things in my mind. If someone has to dare to ask for something, then you have such a limited pool of people who have that voice, that capacity to ask or demand. And I think the Assemble Granby example is interesting because in a way they were doing all of the work anyway and successfully, and Assemble add this layer to it, but they didn't in fact initiate any of the action. They're just like a kind of extra
But they were invited in.
conceptual- yeah, which
By the
has helped
community,
Yeah.
by the community.
which is a rare example, and that's the thing that I still feel it's very difficult, because meanwhile I think we're in a good position to be talking about these things. I feel very comfortable to talk about constituencies and we have a chance to experiment with these things, but the problem is still who decides, who has the voice to ask, and if somebody has to ask, then that's kind of still all wrong. It's just
But
very difficult.
The not difficult part of it, I think, when you want an artist like, oh, we want you to Liverpool for the biennial or whatever big budget project, and come here, spend a week, and come up with an idea. That's wrong way to start things.
Yeah.
I think. So the right way to start things, okay, what is actually urgent, right?
Yeah.
And usually urgencies already have locals involved. So in that case. So if there was an artist came and spotted the same issue, would have been much slower and complicated and less progressive process maybe. So if you are able to start things like, so then you don't start with necessarily already named culture workers, but people actually actively engage within their own environment with all these issues. And they are kind of also creative already. They are creatively engaged because they know what are the things involved. And if you can link those things, already ongoing struggles, then things can get much faster, progressive way, and cultural institutions can be actually useful tools. Otherwise, they cannot be useful.
I think there's something actually really important and beautiful you said as well about that is part of this debate about trying to think constituencies and not quite knowing where we're going, which is Granby 4 Street's a really incredible example of reaching a particular point beyond which we don't really know what happens yet. And it would be very, very interesting to, I don't know, work with them, work for them, listen to them in some kind of way. Two kind of small examples, I think, that one really encapsulates what you said. Shortly after Assemble won the Turner Prize, the Winter Guard, which they're going to build, which will have a space for an artist, etc., was awarded funding by the Arts Council. And Michael was telling me that the Arts Council rang him up, said, "You've got the funding. We've got a press release. Do you want to see it?" So Michael was like, we met Michael. Yeah, I want to see the press release. And so he sent him the press release. And at the start of the press release, I didn't see it. And I trust Michael apparently said, and he wasn't that annoyed by it. He just thought it was funny. It said Granby 4 Streets are a project initiated by artists. Assemble Turner Prize winners. So there was that kind of sort of immediate sedimented assumptions that these things happen. Of course they changed it immediately, etc. But that assumption's there, and that's a kind of an interesting thing to fight and resist against. The other thing was we reconnected with Granby 4th Street via an Office of Useful Art. Then locals from Granby 4th Street kind of had this loose idea that they heard of through discourse of an Office of Useful Art where they could do one themselves and develop things and kind of communicate. And that seems to me to be interesting because they were also quite open that already they've been approached by a range of art institutions who have kind of described precisely those mechanisms that we'll match you up with an artist and they'll come in and one of the lovely things I saw as well, which I've described to anybody who'll listen now, is when we have and I will shut up now. When we had the Office of Useful Art downstairs here, we had A3 copies of representatives of the archive of the Association of Art AUT, which most people came in and looked at as artworks. And when I showed them to Michael and Joe, they just started sifting through them and thinking, that's great, that's really useful, could we get in contact with them because we could do this? And they actually started using it as the toolkit that it's intended to be in the first place immediately. And then said, we could use the artist space that we're developing to start with, and we can network with places, we can maybe network with they want to be that kind of activity. But to finish off on that, because I think you made such an incredibly important point, we don't really know what happens next in these scenarios, and we need to find a way of helping and facilitating without interfering too much. And
well, the danger is they become a cultural organisation.
Yeah.
Which they could very easily do. That would normally that would be the next step. They get the Arts Council funding, they do an artist residency programme, they plug into a network of other institutions before they know it.
Right now, it's
no, but that's the I don't think they will because they're savvy enough not to know not to do that. But if you follow natural courses, if they accept an invitation from the biennial, if they, do a residency program with some cool artist from somewhere, not from the UK, whatever, that's the way these things evolve. And I think they need to really be a good example. They need to not do that.
That's why your point, Pancho, about the idea of constant transition is important. So you're trying to understand the process of transition, not a point that you want to get to.
Yeah, I think that.
If I understood you right.
Yeah. No, I think that what happens is that we tend to imagine that things are gonna happen along a predetermined path because there is a constraint of governance, a constraint of subjectivity that oblige everybody to repeat the same logic again and again. And the point is not so much about how you produce an alterity in some way, but how you move from one place to the other. Because I think that there is where the boring stuff comes through. How you change press release thing, how you change the protocol for asking for a place without a deadline. But these small boundary objects, that are always playing a role of determining what are the possibilities that you can enact somehow, needs to be changed piece by piece. Like I think of what was the project of Agencia in the map to talk about something that we all know. What is interesting there is the way in which all of a sudden you establish new protocols of relation between the director of the museum and the groups that are not recognized as such, so they use a place that is not in the museum but is paid by the museum. So this molecular invention are the one that allows to produce new possibilities, and then the point is how these possibilities will be enacted. But the point is how you. The point I think is also I think it in terms of welfare, and not just of culture. Like how you can think a process of healthcare organization in a neighborhood that changes, for example, the use of the in Spain you have and in England as well. In Italy don't, but in England in Spain you have center for primary attention, no?
Mm.
So in this center for primary attention you have all a set of established hierarchies inside the institution that are established by the, let's say, the code of the doctor, by the way in which the computer stays between me and the patient, and all these kind of protocols I think are crucial in the way in which we think, if we start thinking in terms of transition, this is where we start to think about how we put the screen like this, so that when I talk with the user, I don't have an obstacle, and I don't have private information for myself. I don't have this kind of barrier. So what I think is interesting, and what I want to also to say in this in my presentation, is that there is a series of tools that has been used in the institutional critique that needs to be translated, and the process of translation, we know, is always a process of betrayal of what is the originality of the text into another context. So this process of transposition and change is somehow, and of regulation and change, because what is interesting to me about transition is that it's not the revolutionary transformation that somehow is defined by the absolute unpredictable. But what is about to think about transitions to me is to think that change goes with new forms of regulation, and how this new forms of regulation allows unexpected things to happen.
I think it's institutional critique. You know, normally we are critical about institution incorporated, capitalized, the institutional critique from the 60s on. But I think this is also a process which is kind of positive, let's say, because, you know, that's how the things are changing also. It's, you know, the things that we are discussing here today, the people from the institution, we are discussing it exactly from the reason that the institution incorporated institutional critique, that somehow profited on it, but it is, you know, it is not necessarily bad, let's say, but it only needs to articulate it different, not articulate it, but to, I don't know, to use from that fact, to learn from it, and you know, the things are already happening, and we need to reflect them, maybe from another angle.
Yeah, I think that I really think the idea that what is happening is a movement where, in a way, in the let's say small changes in the institutions that more or less happen at the border, you slowly, let's say, make ground for another type of institution or another type of machinery. And what I think that for me that's very helpful to think, because let's say, depending on where you are, but in our case, in Van Abbe Museum, I think there is, in a sense, our biggest constituency, even if, let's say, their involvement in the decision-making process seems very minimal, but it's what we call the regular visitor who comes to the museum, and they appreciate the exhibition, but and then if they don't appreciate, they don't come, and that's their influence in the decision-making process, because if that goes on long enough, then the city council will raise its finger and say, well, why is this building empty? But let's say what we now try with the 80s exhibition in a few months, with having the umbrella group and Gemma work in the center of the exhibition, and to, in a way, have the other strategy kind of folded into and woven into the other, let's say, another international word that I've learned, dispositive, let's say, the exhibition. It also becomes a kind of a mutual exchange process, because let's say it is contagious to the environment, because suddenly the exhibition itself becomes also something else. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you like. I think that's also how you can keep your let's say, can rethink your basic activity of exhibition making and start to, in a way, maybe a lot of it will stay the same, but let's say the small things will change, and it will, let's say, it can change then into another type of space, another type of, let's say, place for a constituent process.
Let me make an example.
Sure.
Because I think that's very interesting, or at least for me was apart from was really affected me a lot. I don't come up with the English word for it. But like in Trieste, there was this process of opening the asylum. One of the things that happens, so the first thing was to break the locks of the pavilions where people was actually detained for being diagnosed with a mental illness. What happens is that right now I've been like working a bit with one of the local center of one neighborhood in Trieste, and in all the facilities there are no locks. There is no doors that is closed, and there has been a problem because now with the computers and so on, they were starting to lock doors where you would have like machines, because if somebody gets a bit crazy, which happens in a mental health place, then they have destroyed a couple of computers, and that was a problem for the institution, obviously in terms of budgets. And so the discussion was, okay, but this is a problem. We cannot just put a lock, because there's been a transition. We cannot use locks anymore in this room, in these facilities. And what is interesting is that in the moment in which Susan Lee Starr used to say, now you see the infrastructure when the infrastructure collapses, when the infrastructure doesn't work, the garbage is this kind of experience. And so what you see is that in the moment in which you put the lock back, you realize that the reason for which the transition had happened is kind of fading away in the memory of the people. So the possibility of taking and thinking how to avoid to have a lock there allows for a discussion in the institution with people that has come 20, 30 years later than this disruption of the lock had happened, because this happened in 71. So people that is working right now, most of them were not there. But to discuss about why there are no locks and why the most of the meetings are always with open doors, and that is a memory of an instance of reality. To say, and I think that's where the transition is radical as a revolution, but on this moment.
Yeah. Funny that you mentioned this thing about locks and doors, because this links to what I wanted to say. But let me go first with the locks and the doors. When analyzing several cases of collaborative processes of cultural projects, I wouldn't call them artistic, one key element was who had the keys physically to enter the spaces, and that's a clear element of power. Even in Las Agencias in MACA, there's many narratives about what happened there. There's no single agreement on what happened really. What did it end? Why? But one discussion went around doors and locks, and when they came back after the summer, the doors were no longer open. They changed the locks apparently, so that they could not enter anymore that space that was paid by the museum, and that some people that were involved in Las Agencias decided that in that very moment the process was dead, because they couldn't enter anymore. It was not about riots on the street or burning the bus. It was about who was able to enter freely the space to do whatever they wanted. So, talking about keys, I was thinking about this idea of small changes, and I felt that the pressure of, oh my God, we have to have a revolution unless we want to fail. Small changes are just compromising things, but then small changes, and this idea of just transforming, you have the resources that you have institutionally, in terms of human presence is there, and you cannot just erase that and create a new everything. You actually have to transform, so that relaxed me a little bit. Thanks for that. But then I think that these small changes really need to have to do with key elements that actually point at the power knots of the institution, and a key is a very powerful element of the regulation. So instead of using the software of the institution, I think that the changes have to
need to have to do with changing the code of the institution, not just using the software for other things, but changing the code that articulates that software. And I don't know, but another experiment that it hasn't gone very far, but I think that the element of the institution that project pointed at was very important was the archive in the Tapias Foundation, when they opened up the archive of the institution to general consultation and research, meaning that you could check actually the money they spend in, bringing the works of art into the institution, the conditions that they refused. For example, there was a piece of, I don't know which artist, and that piece needed to travel with a specialist that would have to stay for the whole period of the exhibition in a hotel. They decided that they couldn't afford that. Or so small things like this. This is the kind of things that the institution don't usually let people see. And that was open. Of course, the online access of that was very problematic because of privacy things and rights and everything. So that was the limit. They couldn't. It was not the kind of WikiLeaks of the institution with the archive. But I think that that opening of the archive, even if it's just for the people to really go there and ask for, an appointment. You would ask an appointment for the archive, and you could see actually all the small details that were involved in the organization of exhibitions and budget management, decision making, letters among departments, between them with the curator and the artist, the yes and no's, and who was retaining power over the interpretation of the work of certain artists, and how the curatorial department was having problems with that, emails. That was like, wow. And I think that the project is going to be closed, not because of political problem, but just because I don't think that New Direction is going to take that on. But I think that pointing at the locks and keys, pointing at the archive, and that this material documentary archive of the institution and other elements of the institution is where you can actually touch and modify the code of the institution. This kind of changes is what we could experiment with.
Also, the important question is responsibility. It's not only a question of key, who has the key, but how to share the responsibility. I think maybe this is even more difficult to answer.
That's a real challenge, of course.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have a problem, and that is the best way that I can describe it is I once saw this movie of two psychiatrists who were treating patients who were in the First World War, and they were shell-shocked basically. And the one was treating them through electric shock therapy, and the other one was trying to coax them into being able to speak again by gentle means. But the objective of both psychiatrists was just to get them to be functional so that they can go back to the war. And I feel sometimes
That's a sad
and I feel sometimes that somehow the talk about small incremental changes to is somehow doing a similar kind of thing. Because anyway, I'm speaking now from a government employee's point of view. That the internal logic of the government is that it distributes responsibility, so that no one particular person is ultimately responsible for decision making. So generally, and I must confess I've been guilty of this, so generally the default position for anybody who makes a demand is to say no, until you figure out a way of actually helping them. And if you do this often enough, you begin to, in your own mind, have a very sophisticated way of knowing if something is going to work or not. So rather than go through the motions of actually trying to figure out if something is actually going to work, you already know that the answer is going to be no. So you just say no. Now, it's part of what I think is the problem of my institution is that because there are these demands that are constantly being made. Many of them actually have very little to do with what an institution like mine is geared to do. Many of them just have got to do with economic situations that people are facing. So, but at the same time, one is responsible to the parent body, which is the City of Johannesburg, or a government. So part of the thing is about then how do you manage this process? And part of the thing about bureaucratization is that you generate a lot of documents. So you generate documents about policy, you generate new ideas, you generate new programs, and part of this kind of production is actually unproductive labor, because you know ultimately that it's not going to actually yield any positive results. And this takes up not only the goodwill of people, it takes up the time, it takes up the resources of the institution, it takes up a lot of energy to produce something, waste basically. So I think in as much as we are talking about how ways of because actually ultimately what I'm looking for not necessarily in the state, but in institutions of the state or cultural institutions, is a transformative experience, something that is actually going to fundamentally change the way I live. And I think perhaps this is a kind of idealistic thing, because as I was mentioning to to people earlier this morning, we are still a very young democracy, so there's a lot of this kind of idealism about what governments should do. But maybe there isn't really a way of actually enabling government to come out of this kind of internal logic of overproduction and waste.
I completely sympathize in the sense that much of what we do is maybe not the most productive labor. That's what we could do, and that small changes feel maybe are also illusionary. But I think that both the idea that it has to be, let's say, on the hardware and not a kind of reconfiguration of the software in the sense that it stays the same, but if you try to make small but significant real steps, and then if you are, I think what we do now in different institutions from different places coming together and sharing examples and sharing these thoughts, I think that is very helpful to get a sense of what is a real change and what is a weak change, or what is let's say a cosmetic change, and that I think is what what that I think also the Internationale can be about, is you share, let's say, the good and the bad, but you put it on the table and you look at it and you see you can discuss, you can see together much better if a step is a real step or if it's merely another policy paper that will go to the shredder, so to speak. So I think the danger is very real, but I don't really see, let's say, the transformation in one step. I don't see that as a
It's a real possibility.
yeah, and it depends also on your context. I mean, for some that maybe is what is needed, but in our case, to go in, if you come to Eindhoven, you imagine stepping up the street and saying revolution. I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's really, it's not how it works.
When I moved to Holland the first time, I was applying for my residence permit. It took many months to get it, but I would go to that office and get a number and wait for my number. And the first thing I would hear it was not just no, it was no way. And I would go home very upset, wait some more months, go back when they send me another letter, and I would hear another no way. Until once I was back again in that office, got a no way, one more time, I got another number without leaving the office, going back home. and went to another colleague sitting there. And that colleague said, yeah, sure, you can do that. So I was like, I should think of this in the beginning. Not only trust one single employee sitting there and not really knowing the answer of my question and saying the thing you just say in Norway. So this little achievements I think can be productive if you are persistent enough and if there's a continuity, it can get somewhere. Otherwise, they won't mean anything. Yeah, that's one.
And in a kind of a slightly different way also, I have also been thinking now about the kind of difference between collecting and hoarding. Hoarding is, you know what? Okay, a very good example. Like my mother collects things over the years, and she never uses them, but she still keeps them without any reason. Anyway, so and then when I try to get rid of them, she says, "No, you can't get rid of them."
That is holding.
That's hoarding.
Hoarding. And I feel that in certain instances, this thing that we call heritage is not necessarily a productive way. It's not necessarily productive. It's just hoarding at the taxpayer's expense.
That's why it was so interesting when you told us yesterday about the students who burned the paintings, and I asked you about it afterwards.
Yeah.
We have to close
Oh yeah,
the
to send you the
Yeah, because that is actually like a more productive act, you know? Don't you think? Than collecting them, and maybe.
Yeah, I do think it is a productive act.
I think everything should lead to policy changing, and it sometimes takes years. Sometimes it's quicker. If you rush, it often doesn't work. Like once I was invited to a residency funded, and there was a grant by Rockefeller Foundation. And I was just checking on YouTube all the conspiracy theories about, oh shit, I don't know enough about the Rockefeller Foundation to get a grant from them. So what shall I do? Shall I just say no or yes? What shall I do? So I decided to propose them. It was like in a small villa somewhere in the middle of nowhere that they have what all these intellectual people meet, not only artists, writers, lawyers, and so on. So I said my proposal won't be making any work, but I can sit down with one of your policymakers and rewrite ethical principles of the foundation. That was my proposal. I was shortlisted. And of course, I was not the one who got the grant at the end. But you know, if you rush, that's usually the result. If you rush for policy change, so it has to sometimes take a long time.
But you know, I think what I was thinking about when you were talking about bureaucratization and how a lot of these, how you squander resources and time, and a little bit the opposite of what you say, because you in my experience, what you also destroy, if you do this too much, is you destroy trust. You know, like the organization that does this to itself, to its own employees, to its constituencies outside, too often and too much, destroys trust.
Absolutely. Because actually, part of what the problem about actually the demand, basically what I see, how I read the demand is that it's not even so much that I want something like physical or material, but I just want recognition. So I think that applies actually even within the organization. So staff members get demoralized, and precisely because the operations of management and upper management are opaque. So you don't, even when you're doing something, you don't know why you're doing it, you're just doing it because you've been told to do it.
Absolutely. You paint such a wonderful picture.
It's a government employee.
Yes.
But we have to have in mind that we are talking about these changes, full changes under ideal condition. So when this condition change, war, etc., etc., definitely, with our institutions.
What was that today?
Is this productive?
Or not. But the other way.
What's the title of the book?
The title of the book is
was-
Who Has the Kids?
Which you can read in several ways. It's who has the keys or shit, who has the keys?
That's the title.
Earlier thing
Yeah, okay.
for lunch break.
No, it's
I gave you away.
yeah.
To a very responsible colleague.
Wait,
Collaborator.
is the title? Wait.
Is the title?
No,
Oh, yeah, that's a cool one.
yes. Bronze in my blood.
Bronze in my blood, yes.
Yeah. Yes, back to
No, I think I am with you.
But we're gonna use the word?
No?
Action.
What?
The famous word is gonna be in the title.
The
The
thing
famous
is
word.
that this
Which one?
whole beginning of the publication.
Yeah. Or is
I
it
think with certain stubbornness. No, there are no cosmetic framing of the whole instruction.
They
can be
you want to change
you
it.
can be
No.
aware and you can
I think it's, you know, although it's not like
Huh?
clear, absolutely, and it's good that it's not, it's the best word for what we are needing now. I think it's
really
still
good way to put
the
it.
best word. It has some theoretical background, but it also has the answers and references from the practice. I think they were
Constituencies.
Oh, okay.
But I have
The C word.
a sort of open question around this question of heritage, because for me the focus on constituencies in a way is sort of setting itself up diametrically opposed to ideas of heritage. If you think about what we're talking about in terms of the constitution needing to be rewritten by each generation, this is something that in a way is constantly wanting to explode, dismantle heritage and reform it again. So I just wonder, it was something I was trying to point towards in my presentation, like how do we square that circle if we are institutions of heritage to a certain degree with certain collections? What's the relationship between constituencies and heritage?
For me, a very quick answer, once again, came from actually a visit with myself and Alistair once again to Granby, when we were talking to Michael, and he was showing us a set of books and documents that had been written in the 1970s about the absolutely abhorrent housing conditions in the UK, and he was showing us that one of the examples that had been used was Toxteth, and one of the things that group's really keen on is trying to actually archive and build their own heritage, something that's been systematically taken away from them and denied of them as a voice, and something that in the big archive of the City Council they have evidence that's been actively erased. Minutes of meetings that have been, you know, that weirdly there's a garbage link. Toxteth was known as one of the dirtiest areas in Liverpool. There were always back alleys that were full of rubbish, and a perception grew. Once I mess you up not, Alistair was my witness. A perception grew and was fostered that that's because this was a dirty area of town full of dirty people. Yeah. What was actually physically erased, but some has been found, are earlier policy decisions, tactical small policy decisions from the other side to say that they would get less than half the amount of money for garbage removal and waste disposal as anywhere else in the city. And that impacted on perceptions. Some of the new houses that were built in Granby, it's just a great example as we talk about it, some of the new houses that were built in Granby about 5-6 years ago were built so badly that drains collapsed. Yeah, the immediate response of the council was to say, well, that's no surprise because they're dirty. Who knows what they were flushing down the drains? Which doesn't make drains collapse. Which is kind of evidence of a long-term, systematic use of small policy for a long-term impact on perceptions. And one of the things I think to return to about heritage is that smaller, for want of a better word, communities, constituencies, want to actually use archives themselves in order to reclaim and rebuild their own heritage and stake claims for it. I know that's incredibly messy and difficult, but it's one partial answer.
Actually, there is a very good example also in South Africa of a museum that started because of a reclaiming of land, a land reclamation project. The District 6 Museum, there's an area in Cape Town, which is a coastal city on the west of South Africa, where a community was removed in late 1950s, early 60s. And the land was not used after that, but so in the 90s they were able to reclaim some of that land. And then they built a museum called the District 6 Museum. And the people who had spearheaded the building of this museum had made a decision early on that the museum was about the specific community and the survivors of the removals, but also their children. So I think they, for me, is a very important thing that from the onset, the tourist was never in the kind of thinking around the museum or any other community for that matter. It was a very specific group of people. And I think that, okay, anyway, from there, those people who had survived the removal then brought their own personal objects of things that reminded them of that particular place. They brought their blankets, their pieces of china or cutlery or whatever it was, and that began to form the collection of and the exhibit of the museum. And so that kind of process for me seems to be much more of a much more relevant way of thinking around not just collections but exhibitions, but a constituency as well. And part of their thing actually also is still fighting the City Council of Cape Town to actually, fortunately they are an independent museum, they've never received government funding. So to actually get more of the land that they lost in the 60s. So their thing is about how do you use memory for social change, and for me that is essentially what I hope the museum in which I work can become. But I find that okay, I'm not going to go into that. I was just trying to mention that the District 6 Museum is for me the model of what museums can achieve.
Yeah, I think that there were examples on the table these last 2 days, the truth that the question of heritage is not an expert question, that Marwa, Ahmed, and there are many examples of the artists who deal with the heritage on the way that helps also the museum. So we have from our own practice in Moderne Galleria a lot of examples when we learn from the artists, from the artist archive, the things that you normally would learn from the experts. But that also changed the the institutional work perspective and the way of working. So I think it's a very relevant question, and it's also very relevant that we acknowledge the constituencies' role in taking care about the heritage. So there is no exclusive right to heritage.
It also depends on where you think that heritage actually is.
Yeah,
What is it?
absolutely.
Is it a set of objects? I mean, if you go to
Absolutely.
China, for example, you
Yeah.
see, the Forbidden City is a complete fake.
Yeah.
And you ask people, well, where's the heritage? And you go, it's in my head.
Yeah.
I mean, this is it comes back to use a little bit, unfortunately, in a bit of Wittgenstein maybe, but it's how we use our heritage, how we use our history in the present that matters, that gives it its agency and gives it something we call meaning rather than some things in a room. And I think people understand that widely. I don't think that's necessarily, it's not necessarily a new thing.
It's very like Sancho, the Pancho's model before of the dispersed mental institution that exists in several places and several networks as a series of relationships within a city. I think it's something that we have to accept that today, because you're absolutely right. It has to be a set of relationships which are fostered and respected over a period of time, and may appear in very different places at very different times in very specific locations.
And look at the way the heritage industry itself. If you distinguish that from the culture industry. In the UK, we have a very strong heritage industry of National Trust and English heritage and all these looking after stately homes. And 20 years ago, they were very much about stopping the castle falling down. Now they're turning castles into luxury boutique holiday homes, or they're into shopping centres, or this kind of thing. And you could quite well imagine that in 30 years' time, Granby, if it plays its cards the wrong way or the right way, it could end up as some sort of under some glass bubble with a ticket office at the front door. I mean, these things are totally depend on the context and how they're manipulated by their kind of inherent users and external users as well.
I think Granby is a very, very good example, actually. And talking about constituency, I think it's not only the question of new possibilities, but it's also the question of otherness. Also the heritage. That there are always things that are like other, and it's good to have different agencies in building the heritage question, because only this is the way how to protect the place for otherness. I think this is very important.
And it's funny with the keys question as well.
Yeah.
So I think you can, say if I gave the keys to my museum to someone, does that liberate the museum, or does that just turn someone else into another part of the institution by giving them the keys? And I think this is a problem, that as long as the institution remains as a heritage identity, as a conceptual construct, no matter how physically you break down that, those barriers of, hey, we took the windows out and let people come in through the back door, all this sort of stuff, it's still the institution, it's still that thing. So it's very much about how, as a kind of civic or a citizen or a social construct, we think about the institution, because they're all just bunches of people. And Granby itself is a cultural institution. It's not a cultural institution by the standards we would normally say, but it's still nonetheless, it's a group of people organising, creating an entity which works in ways which we could describe as art. That's one of the reasons, I suppose, why it was able to squeeze into the Turner Prize to a certain extent against much resistance, but nonetheless it was allowed within that because it's had many of the facets that we associate with culture, but it was whether it crossed that line, whether it could cross that threshold, was very much a battle.
If you look back, you know very well that example in Amsterdam last year. There was a university occupation. Was it 20 time since '68? They occupied the main building, like administrative building of the Amsterdam University. And when I visited there, and it was still ongoing over a month, the key issue was there. They break all the doors, including director's door and everything, so everyone can just walk in and have their own meetings. So there was so many things going on in the building, and they say that one reason it was also open to the public, so people can walk in and out. And if you have public walking in and out, police cannot storm the building and empty the building. So they don't know who are the occupiers, who are the visitors. And there was families and kids also daytime especially. So the undercover police, also who is undercover police, we don't know. So they go at night, take photographs of people who are sleeping there as the occupiers to be able to identify who are the occupiers. So the way to keep it as long as they can, at the end police storm. But they kept it as public as possible. So there was no more distinction anymore who is the academic, who is the occupier, who is the outsider, who is from the building, who is the organizer. So it was like always undercover police. So it was interesting. Also, those undercover police, they told me they come at night and put new locks on the rooms, some of the rooms. And they would next day break the locks again, free that room, and keep it open. So it didn't last so long, but it actually lasted for a while. So I think this tensional conversation of collectively making something happen, it was interesting. So if you think the building was the institution, and occupiers are actually employees, and the public actually they were temporary visitors. So if you can metaphorically think this whole situation, and I think that tension is needed to be able to keep it dynamic. What is happening? Like they had at some point more academic curriculum presentations happening than normal school time. Like there was classes everywhere and all happening at the same time, attended by a lot of people, and or the museum was sending a lot of material support to the space. So there was a lot of collaborations inside and outside, but it was also possible to turn into like this protected by glass and ticket office at the entrance kind of thing. You know, if you overdo it, like all the famous academics wanted to go give a lecture at some point. They were king. So it also has to be taken care of. But that tension, I think that the moment of the tension in the highest level was the moment that it was actually fully functional and accessible.
Do you know of any cases of occupation of museums?
There are occupations of museums, but
Van Abbe Museum in the 80s.
Huh?
Van Abbe Museum in the 80s.
Yeah.
Completely?
Exhibition space.
Exhibition space?
You remember?
I don't know exactly.
The architectural triennale in Milan.
Which one?
In the 70s in Milan was a strong, long occupation of the triennale.
Artist wage being cut.
I mean, museums don't need to be occupied. They can actually collaborate and do partnerships.
Occupied also means lived in, right?
But I have also problems. I mentioned it yesterday with identifying institution with the building, with the like museum, university, whatever. For me, it's a system of knowledge, which is institution. And talking about the heritage and where is heritage? It's not only kept in the museums, but it's.
The heritage is also, as Pancho was mentioning to me, I don't know, Pancho, if that's public or no, but this idea of the Lesbos, this heritage of the migrants, migrant museum that you were thinking of.
I didn't listen.
There is I was in Lesbo in January, and one of the discussions that people was, because Lesbo obviously is in this situation of having the people arriving every day, and one of the things that the municipality and also part of the civil society is looking towards is to actually to compete, which is this kind of articulate thing, to compete as the European Capital of Culture in 2019, I think, with the brisk year. And one of the things they would like to try to develop is a museum of refugees and migration, and which is interesting in the sense that on the one hand you need to think how to produce an economy around the situation that they have there, because obviously the tourism is going to fall by 40-60%. You have all what they are voluntarism that is like volunteerism, tourists voluntaries that are tourists at the same time. So there is all an economy to develop there, but there is also a matter of what kind of system of knowledge, institutional system of knowledge you could produce around the process of migration and refugees, and how you cannot, and the conversation with Bojana was about how you cannot really locate that in Lesbos itself. You have to think it as a route and kind of the Silent University model of production of an heritage, if you want, of a system of an archiving of practices and knowledge.
But it's also very important who would finance the museum, you know, because it happens very often that, for example, European Union finances this kind of institutions or whatever and clean the hands, and you know, it's I think it's good to be aware about this double. And at this moment, it's also a question where is more important to invest the money and energy, you know, when the problem is still so strong. It's at the same time, of course, it's important to keep the memory. We try to do it now, not post-factum, to work on the.
I think it's a very ambivalent
it is,
question, in the sense that, for example, if you think an example in Lesbos is that most of the money that comes from the European Union for intervening on the refugee crisis has been used in order to maintain safe or clean the beaches. And there is a system that is very complex, because on the one hand you understand that it's a matter of having boats that are left there and collecting all the things and reuse it, recycle, for example, all the life jackets, but also the clothes in general, because people arrive and is wet, and so there is all a system of an ecology of care that needs to be implemented there. But also there is this idea that if you have the beaches full of this imagination of drama, then this would affect the local economy a lot, which I don't think is necessarily a wrong concern, but is a concern that is implemented in a moment of great and of a greater complexity, and so it's a very weird conversation, the one you're having.
I very cleaned most of it.
It went directly to memory.
I very cleaned most of it.
Yes.
So there is a proposal that we end. Maybe either have some practical advice.
I am admiring that.
Telling her.
So let's
Aida just said that this is like thinking and taking notes in public.
Yes, and it's
making visible your thoughts.
I am a little bit jealous because you can do it. But you and I don't.
You're gonna get it on.
We are all jealous.
So anyhow, concerning the communication and publishing whatever has been said online in the next month or so, all the presentations and the lecture are going to be published on the webpage. So if anyone wants to come back and refer to anything while you are going to write your texts, you may do that. I would really love it if you all, I know you're all very busy people, but if you could send us a longer version of the text by April 30th. This gives you a fair amount of time to think of it, also for those who would like to rewrite everything. I would really love it if you could propose some works to connect to your terms. Also,
Not only artworks.
well, it could be any kind of other cultural references explicitly if
Can
you
be
want
text.
to.
Text or
Poem, whatever.
a poem.
If
Like
you-
list of references or mentioned?
One
List
thing
of-
is
list of
there are different levels. Mentioning in the text, we can hyperlink and you go from your text to another page. If you want to explicitly address a work, maybe it might be your own practice, is fair enough. You can send images or PDFs or whatever of what you would like to have published along with some sort of description. If you go to the webpage, then you have it all in your booklets. You have under I think it's common heritage or something like that. You have different types of documents that we publish. It might be a document like text, like Zenka said, or an artwork or an exhibition that you want to reference as a whole, for example, in your case, for example. So I'd really appreciate it if you could send some additional text, some additional material, so that we think toward publishing this in a book format in 2017, because as it looks currently, the book is going to be going into the direction of also using cases of artistic practice and other theoretical works.
The text that you want to on
April.
It's not the. It's the one to be published. Yeah, no, it's not the final one.
Yes, it is. Well, I mean, it's your final text, but it's not a very long format. It's about approximately, it could be longer or shorter, of around 1,000 words. This means like 2 to 3 pages at most. So this is something very concise. If you would like to contribute anything else, you're more than welcome. I would also like all of those who've had PDFs prepared or PowerPoints or something, if you are able to use these images either for any kind of copyright reasons that you might not be, but if you are able to use these images, then we would also like to publish the PDFs online, so that whoever wants to look at your recording can also refer to that. So this is that. And regarding the proofreading, we will be light-handedly proofreading your texts, meaning correcting obvious mistakes, but not totally polishing your way of expressing. So we will not have a heavy-handed proofreading. But nevertheless, in a couple of months or so, when the proofreading is going to be done, I'm going to send you a link to all of you, just to make sure that we hadn't made any mistakes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can I make a request? If there are people who from the institutions have got a book that they can donate to me, so I can add it to the museum library, I'd appreciate it.
We can send you. I think we can. There is a mailing list, yes.
Yeah.
So we can exchange. Stay in contact. This is only the beginning of long friendship. I think we need to thank everybody. It was really super interesting, and we have to thank John. This is really. Really super, and we enjoyed it very much. But it's not the end.
It was only the first loss. No, absolutely. We've got stuff to come. My final act is to teach you a 1980s Scouse phrase. Of just the Scouse, just 1980s, the Scouse accent, the Liverpool accent. Took everything besides verbs. You know, just like it became. Paul Sullivan, who's your host tonight, speaks like this in text still. So I'm going to start from the reverse. Sound means thank you, great, good. Boss means brilliant. Dead means very. So,
There.
Zed Bosch, shout.
So we are going to the hotel and then
Yeah.
if
Go
you
to-
can repeat for
Yeah,
those
if for those who want to go to the hotel and freshen up, Emma has been kind enough to say that she will pick people up at 6:30 and walk them up to Static.
so we meet in the
lobby of the hotel.
6:30.
Yeah.
There is an opening.
Yeah, tonight we're going to have Korean food, and it's also going to be an opening of a project stroke company that Stephen and Nick have been working with Paul Sullivan from Static on, called Paul's Kimchi Camp. So it's a kind of an ET launch.
Is it a public?
No, it's just for us. It's just for us. And if you want to find your own way there and be disobedient, hang around and go to pubs in Liverpool before 6:30, 7 o'clock, feel absolutely free to as well. Of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good job, thanks.
Thank you.
By the way, there's a very good second-hand bookshop for those of you who are interested. Right out here on the Pleasant Mount.